Welcome to episode 76 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with Tim.
Hey, everybody. 76. I love it. Happy 76. It's amazing we made it this far, and we're going to just keep going, and I'm thrilled about it. This is just fantastic. So let me mention a couple things first before I pause for our sponsors. We're continuing a tradition of mentioning just the names of some listeners who reach out to us. So I want to give a shout out to Nancy Mahan, who is an exec at Estee Lauder. She works in sustainability. She's worked with a lot of other companies, a lot of other efforts in the years. She's a listener. I'm very happy. Deepan Patel from Hobart. They do a lot of different refrigeration products and whatnot, supplies, parts, service, that sort of thing. Great for him. Also, and I just blanked on one for Sal Conca. Sal, who is a longtime friend of mine, long ago, very long ago, he was an employee of mine too. But he is the CEO of a new agency, and he's listening to our podcast as well. So great to hear from you, listeners. Just reach out anytime. Tell us what you think. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to give a minute or so shout out just to recognize and thank you. So now let me take a quick pause so we can insert our sponsor mentions, and then I'll throw it back to Isaiah. Our first sponsor is PunchOut2Go. PunchOut2Go is a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. PunchOut2Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for PunchOut catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents in order to accelerate business results. Balance is our other sponsor. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com, book a session, and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Okay, everybody. Now we're going to introduce our guest today. We have Brian Lombardo, and I'm going to have Isaiah continue from here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to have you from Unilog. It's probably a long time coming. One of our goals of the podcast is to be very objective and as unbiased as we can be. Obviously, Trellis has, I come from the Trellis agency side. We have our own biases. But Unilog, you guys have been a major player in the B2B commerce space and have stayed true to purely being B2B focused, I think, forever since the company started. So can you give us a quick background on yourself, how you got into this, and then obviously some background on Unilog so people can better understand?
Yeah, sure thing. I guess before I get into that, the episode 76 coming into July 4th weekend. How fitting, right?
Absolutely.
I almost said something about that too. Yeah, it's not 76. We're a few hundred years past that, but yeah, it's a good time to kind of feel there's a lot of like negative news, and I think can get easy to get kind of like caught up in that, but we still have a great country, and I hope everyone enjoys the holiday. And I feel like B2B e-commerce is very American in the sense that it's a lot of industrial companies, and it's the stuff that I think people don't realize, a lot of the backbone of the economy. So it's kind of a good time, I think, to talk about it.
Agreed. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Like Isaiah and Tim had mentioned, my name is Brian Lombardo. Currently, I hold the role of the Senior Vice President of Partners and Channels over at Unilog. Prior to that, I come from industry. So I spent the better part of 20 years working for a very large industrial distributor, about $1.4 billion in revenue.
Wow.
240 locations across North America. So I come from the space. We were, I want to say that we were early adopters, but anywhere in the B2B space, if you always seem to be a laggard somewhere, right? Because you always feel as though you're catching up. B2C always was kind of blazing, doing the trailblazer, and you try to leverage and see what's working in that space and how it can be applied to B2B. So so that's a little bit about me. So I did that for about 20 years. 10 of those years I implemented what we called e-business. So that was basically if we had a trading partner, and a trading partner could be defined as either a customer or a vendor, but if they wanted to do business with us electronically, it fell underneath e-business, all right? Or if we needed to do business with them electronically, just because of the sheer volume of transactions that we were doing, you get to a point where you're just throwing manpower at it to be able to do something. So you try to leverage technology to try to offset some of that, where you can remain profitable as you start to scale. So after that, I spent 5 years working for one of the leading ERP companies in the B2B distribution place, a place called Infor. I headed up their industry and strategy group for the distribution suite of products, which covered SXE, A+, Fax. And then from there, I oversaw the product development of their next-gen e-com solution. So did that for a while, and then I had an opportunity. Some of the folks that I worked with over at Infor had moved over to Unilog, all right? And Unilog was pure play e-com, right? In B2B distribution spaces that I know well, technology I knew well. The thing that really excited me about it is that they were relatively small. They were an up-and-comer, and they seemed to have a product that could really fit the need of a lot of different verticals in the distribution B2B space, all right? That and the fact that they also had solved for one of the major obstacles to a successful e-commerce solution, and that's content enrichment. So for those that are in the B2B, primarily, maybe even in distribution space, catalog sizes can be big, real big. When I was over at that industrial distributor, we had about 1.4 million SKUs. So you can imagine 1.4 million SKUs in ERP, right, where the quality of that data is going to be very limited, right? The data as it sits in an ERP is basically there to solve and serve one purpose, and that's for transaction processing, right? It was never meant to be used in a way to put it into the end user's hands to be able to do something with, right? So that all of that data, all of that content, all of that SKU level information all needed to be enriched. It needed to be made web ready, web friendly, all right? So there's a massive investment that is required to take the wares that you want to sell online and make those web ready, right? They have to be attributed. You need to have those rich descriptions. You need the images, you need videos, you need things like, if you're in like say the electrical space, you need installation guides and PDFs, you need MSDS sheets, right? So all of these things go into a web self-service model, because these are the types of pieces of information that customers are looking for. So Unilog actually started off as a content enrichment company. So they were doing, and it's some of the brands that that are out there, Lowe's being one, MSC, Grainger, there's a lot of them, and we've done this for 20 years, all right? Matter of fact, when I was at that distributor, I actually partnered with a company to do my outsourced it to do my content enrichment of those 1.4 million SKUs, only to find out that work was then subbed out to Unilog. So, and I didn't know about that until I started with Unilog, and they're like, "Oh, you were at, such and such." And I'm like, "Yeah." So they're like, we did all that work. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that makes sense.
Oh, no, I was just going to interject for one thing you mentioned, then I'll let you continue. You were talking about like MSC and Granger and whatnot. So I years ago, I worked with MSC Industrial, right? And it was kind of their transition from catalog to early web. At that point, if my memory serves me correctly, they had like some sort of keystone system where you would have one item per category that they went all out. They had the photos, they had the, and then anything that was related to it, they just had, product numbers, and they would say, here's the one that's the keystone. If you want any of these variations, here are the product numbers. And they had, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of SKUs at that point, but that was the only, way that they had developed things over the years that they had been in business. So at what stage did you guys come involved with them, and what stage were they in?
I wasn't around then. I take a look at our leaderboard on, some of the enrichment projects that we have had in the past, and I saw them. So that the scope, I'm not 100% sure, but what I can tell you is that along with being the ERP, being the transaction engine, the categories in the what they call a taxonomy, which is basically the category structure of an item master, item file, right? When it's built for transaction processing, it's quite different than when you need to look at it from a human user perspective to try to get yourself to a single item, right? Humans think different, right? So when they go onto a site, there needs to be a logical flow of how a person would navigate a category structure to find a particular item. So you absolutely can have a couple of different versions of a taxonomy. You can have one that would be like a buying taxonomy, which is probably going to be in like the ERP space, right? And then you'll have a selling taxonomy, which is where somebody like you or me or Isaiah would jump on there and say, okay, well, logically, if I needed to get down to a particular bearing, this is going to be the path, and these are the nodes that I'm going to take, right? And it's quite different, and it can get very, very detailed on that structure. So when you're looking at enriching a catalog, it's way more than just doing those things that I mentioned earlier about, the descriptions and the attributes, right? There's a whole science behind taxonomy, right? There's people out there, there's a profession, taxonomists, right? It's a real thing, right? Yeah. These guys are scientists, and they will actually start to think and figure out what is the optimal category structure for any particular vertical. All right, so we have those people on staff. So if you happen to be in the electrical space, right, this is going to be, an optimized taxonomy. If you're going to be in the plumbing, pipe, valve, and fitting, bearing and power transmission, right, these are going to be the taxonomies that make sense in your space, all right, because of where the products lie. And at some point, you're right, you navigate that structure and you'll get down to a single SKU, right? So all that being said, so, that's how the company got its start. They were doing, a lot of enrichment. And then rumor has it is the CEO at one point asked a few customers, what are you doing with all of this data that we're giving you hundreds of thousands of SKUs a quarter? What are you doing with all of it? And they said, well, we're using it on a website. And they're like, well, can you show us how it's presenting? So they started to take a look at it, and they said, you know what, we have some pretty smart people in the organization. We could do a better job on a website with that. We know the products, we know the taxonomy. We could probably develop something better. And that was the birth of the software side of the business, right? So we have both the content enrichment and we have the commerce, right? So we differentiate ourselves a lot in that regard. So when we are engaged with somebody, typically it'll start off with a content type of discussion that leads into commerce, right? So when we go to market, we're going to market as a content plus commerce solution, turnkey, right? So as you well know, right, when you start to think about the software side of what it takes to put a website out there and what it takes to be able to manage the content behind that, there's different modules and components that are absolutely required. You need a PIM, right? Because like I said, you're taking ERP data that resides within an ERP, and we'll get into this much more when we start talking about the integration. But you're taking that ERP data, you're enriching that data, you're putting a taxonomy to it. You need a place to manage it. You need to extend what has been in the ERP. And you need a tool to do that, all right? And they call that a product information management tool, or otherwise known as a PIM, right? So, and there's a lot of third parties out there that you can spend a ton of money on getting to allow you to extend the SKU level product information out there. Our solution comes bundled with a PIM, because that PIM basically is the engine that pushes that data and allows you to manage that data for the website. We do have some people that use it to produce catalogs and other, users of that data, but the primary customer or user of that PIM would be our commerce site. So you have that. Then you also need the other major component of any site is a content management system, right? You need some way to create these sites. You need some way to create these pages. You need some way to manage them, theme them, treat them, right? So you need a CMS. And again, there's a bunch of third parties out there, right? Our system comes bundled with these. So when you are looking at from a total comprehensive solution on all of the components you need, it's the PIM, it's a CMS, it's a shopping cart, it's the content enrichment, right? And the last major piece is going to be the integration, right? Not only that, but you need a feature set that's going to be aligned with your particular vertical. The requirements from a feature set on somebody in pipe, valve, and fitting is probably going to be a little bit differently than somebody in HVAC, right? And they're going to be something a little bit differently than electrical, right? Yeah, so over time, and again, because this is what we do and all we do, we have built out this feature set to align with these verticals. All of our customers, 90%, is all in the B2B distribution space. So we have a pretty good idea of how these particular verticals operate and how these customers operate, how sites should be laid out, all right? So we have all of this knowledge, and we have been able to productize this into a rapid deployment methodology, all right? So, so I just want to make sure, am I kind of tracking here? Does this all make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you guys are very capable of getting a B2B company up quickly, I think, with e-commerce, which is I think generally challenging, right? I think one of the reasons B2B is behind is that it is more complicated, right? The ERP integration is usually more complicated, or they almost always have an ERP. They have more SKUs, the data enrichment, the data is more difficult, and you guys are kind of simplifying that for them, having it all in one product and process. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the ERP integration, because I think that's a really undervalued piece of like how difficult these projects are. And because what we found, and we've done a lot of work in the Infor space, but we work with all of them. We've dealt with SAP and NetSuite and Oracle, or all the different major ERPs. We've had customers probably with at least some variation of one of them. Is that it can get really complicated when you're talking about like, okay, well, the pricing's in the ERP and it's specific to the customer. With your integration, how are you guys thinking about that? Are you trying to kind of leverage the data in Infor for what it's meant to be, and that's what's kind of displayed to the customer? Or
yeah, so in the B2B space, like you mentioned, there the population of ERPs that are out there is relatively small, right? And they tend to control a very large percentage of the users. So you have the likes of Infor, you have Epicor, SAP, Oracle, right? Acumatica is coming onto the scene now, right? And then there's a few others out there, Sage, and Microsoft's got a product or two. So you have all of these customers that are using these ERPs. In the B2B space, and probably pretty much for any space rather, the ERP is the system of record, and it is also the transaction system, all right? Everything that goes on within a particular customer, whether it's pricing, whether it's inventory, whether it's orders, invoices, or whatever, it all happens within the ERP, okay? You don't want to duplicate that effort, right, over onto a website, right? You want to be able to leverage that. You want a single point of maintenance of those items. You want a single point of maintenance for those customer files. You want a single point of maintenance for your pricing records. Because me, Brian, if I'm a customer, I can go onto the website and I can take a look and pull up a particular gearbox, and that price is going to come up at $317.17. Well, when I call a branch instead of the website, I should get that exact same price, all right? The ERP is what's serving that up, okay? So the integration is absolutely critical to moving the relationship for a B2B online, all right? And that integration—
I want to touch on that. I think it's so—
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think what a lot of people don't realize and why this is so hard to do is that, and especially in distribution, pricing could be like literally different for every customer. So you could have, let's say, 10,000 customers with 1 million SKUs, and each one of them might have a different price per SKU, and that's all controlled in the ERP. And you can create rules, and some people simplify it around like tiers and rules, but it can be very personalized. And this depends on the organization. But I'm just curious, are you finding that most organizations have it at basically a customer level, or what's kind of—
It's exactly that, Isaiah. I mean, every customer that we've dealt with, they maintain pricing at the customer level. So that SKU, I could get a different price than you, than Tim, right? And all of that is managed by either some pricing group within the company, right? The distributor or the B2B company. They manage all of that pricing at that level, right? So it could be things like, I have an agreement. I'm going to sell this basket of goods, this market basket. I've negotiated and I've won the right to sell this basket of goods to this customer at these prices. Well, that needs to be carried over into the ERP. The ERP needs to reflect what that arrangement and what those contractual obligations are within the ERP. The website, in turn, needs to be able to take that forward for people that are going onto the website to be able to say, hey, these are the items I have. This is the price that we've negotiated with, and have it presented that way.
And I think it's really important that people understand what you guys are doing, because we've done something similar in other platforms, and it's not easy. Which is you're matching that customer record with a price. You're using the price from the ERP, right? You're not trying to duplicate all the pricing records. So I think people don't realize, like, and I've seen this with other companies. They're like, oh yeah, we're just gonna store it in the e-com platform. Like, good luck trying to store 10,000 customer records across 100,000 SKUs of different pricing, and then keep it updated, right? That means not only do you have to store it in e-commerce if that's your strategy, which it shouldn't be, you'd have to update that consistently as they change it, and it's almost an impossible task, which is why it really needs to kind of live in the ERP. But to your point, you guys are displaying it on the website, but you're not necessarily— can you just speak to that a little bit? Because I think it's really important that people—
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head. So all of the pricing is maintained in the ERP, right? So when a customer logs on to our site, or they come onto the site, initially they're an unknown, they're a guest, they're anonymous, right? But the minute they log in, now I have the user, I have Brian Lombardo, all right? Attached to my profile is going to be my customer number. That customer number is going to open up everything on the ERP side for me, right? So when I do a price query, like if I pull up a particular item on that gearbox, it is going to send an API request down to the ERP to return pricing and availability for that particular item, right? So all of that is being retrieved on a real-time, or depending on some situations on a near real-time basis, okay?
Yeah.
But you're right. There's no way you can be successful in managing and having and maintaining it in two different places, because it'll be in sync for about the first second and a half.
So
Well, also just the sync alone would crash the site because there'd be so much data trying to go back and forth.
That's right.
so let me throw something else out there. So I'm working with a B2B company right now, and one of the companies, so one of their projects is they are, and Isaiah mentioned this, they want to move to a tier-based system, right, for pricing. And let's just say that where they end up is tiers 1 through 9. I mean, it's not going to be 2 tiers or 3 tiers. It'll be more than that. But they're looking at something like that, where essentially they give it like a 2 or 3 year window, and they move all of the customers, and they have hundreds of thousands into those 9 tiers, or let's just say that'll be the number. And then it's all of a sudden it's more simplified and everybody's happier. So why do you think B2B overcomplicates things? Why is everything customer based? Why can't they just move to systems like this very large company is trying to do?
Again, I think a lot of it has got to do with the way terms are negotiated, right? It could be where you have some history with a particular customer on a particular item. You've always sold it to me for this price, right? I'd like you to honor that, right? Some will negotiate different levels. They'll negotiate on cost plus, list less, right? So it all depends on how things are negotiated. I have seen the tiered pricing come up recently. Matter of fact, as recent as about a week or so ago. The ERP could not handle it. All right. Mm-hmm. Yep. It wasn't set up to do that. And the ERP provider could absolutely get there, but the customer was looking to move a little bit faster than the ERP could provide. So there's a couple of ways that you can handle that. And the first is there's some third parties out there that will do that. So you can just take a load or a dump of the customers and the items, and then you can start to assign your tiers, your zones, your regions, or however you want to do it. Assign those customers to that with some kind of factor, right? Yeah. So when that now all of a sudden, now instead of managing however many different iterations of a particular item, you're managing, if you're in this particular zone or tier or region, right, this is going to be the factor that you're going to apply to either the cost or the price on that particular item, which we know is basically going to be set, right? So that's why there's third parties out there that can do that. We actually have created something internally to do almost exactly that same thing. It's a little piece of middleware that we've put in between that allows us to do that. Because the customer didn't want to wait. The ERP will catch up, but we had to scope this thing out and be able to create another table that's going to allow us to do exactly what I just said. So we're going to be creating this little, I don't know, it's kind of like a third party or a preprocessor, if you will, to be able to calculate based on, I think they wanted to go to regions, and then zones within regions or something along those lines. But it's going to give us that kind of flexibility to be able to do that. All right. Okay. The other thing you'll start to see is with, in distribution, and that's the space that I know. But you have manufacturers. Manufacturers will also dictate what price is going to be sold, right? In what areas, right? Not only what prices can be sold or at what price, but also what items. So you have to start to think about the way that these distributors are set up with their territories, in terms of, they call them APRs, their authorizations, right? So you can sell these items in these particular geographies, but you can't sell it here. And if you're going to sell it here, you have to sell it at this price, right? So that's another level of things that we have. And there's some really big major manufacturers out there that do a really good job of monitoring to make sure that you stay within the guardrails of those authorizations. So we've had to get creative there as well.
It's gotten, and this firsthand, but it does, in my experience, it's also gotten more complicated because when you're a business that's big enough that you have locations in a lot of places, you order where it's less expensive for you, and then you ship from that location to the other. So that's a problem, right? That needs to be solved. So the manufacturers kind of need to change their system as well, because that's been happening for years.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to kind of touch on multi-warehouse, which is another aspect which I think is very complicated, where one of the things that you think the ERP, especially like an Infor, is pretty good at is this concept of the multi-warehouse. And what do they call it? There's like a name, or I forget if they have like a name for it. I don't think they call it warehouse.
Different stocking. Some call it warehouses, some call it branches.
Yeah, branches.
Locations.
So they can see where the inventory is based on branches or warehouse. And I think they can make it so that it can ship or order out as the most. So let's say I'm ordering from Kentucky. You don't want to ship out from California if you have the item. Like maybe you have an item in California and the same item in a closer location. You want to get it from the closer location. It seems like the ERPs are kind of designed to help you with that to some degree. I mean, obviously it's not as good as it.
They are. And some do a better job with that. They call that, if you think about it, we always were chasing, when I was working at that distributor, of the perfect order. Right. So, and there's companies out there that have created what they call an OMS, and an order management system, that does exactly that. So what it will do is it will take a look at, the order you want has got these 5 items. Okay. And here's where those 5 items are located. Right. You have options. You can either start to ship individually. Right. You can consolidate. But when you ship individually, you're looking at some freight charges. Right. You can actually start to think about consolidating, right? Maybe this location's got 3 and this location's got 2, right? So maybe you start to say, well, maybe I'll just send those and transfer those 2 over to the warehouse that's got the 3, and I'll put all of that as a ship complete and I'll send it. Or maybe they don't have it at all. Maybe the manufacturers have it all and you got to drop ship it, right? But there's technology and there's algorithms that can go through, and it can look at transit time, it can look at freight, and it can come back and say, based on what you need and when you need it, this is the optimal way to process this order.
Yeah. Well, my point is that I think this is where the ERP integration also is important, right? Because you have that pricing record tied to the customer from the ERP, but you may also need like warehouse information about where the items are. So there's just so much complexity into the ERP integration, in my opinion, just around this data being priced out per customer, and also potentially being in a bunch of different locations. Or let's say they have a cart of 100 items, it could be a bunch of different warehouses, right? And then they might also want to be tied to their main branch. So like if you're not connected to an ERP, I guess what I'm getting at is like I see a lot of companies in B2B specifically going into projects where they have to custom build the integration to the ERP. And I don't think people realize how hard that is. Like if you want to do all these things, right? Like I think it's not so hard to just pass the order. Like you're like, oh, we just want to pass the order down. That's like the simplest version, right? Like the order goes from e-commerce down to the ERP. When you start to talk about like this inventory allocation, pricing, it's like these are really hard things to build custom from scratch, or maybe hard isn't the best word, really expensive things to build from scratch.
That's right?
The answer. And that's where I think a lot of companies aren't realizing, like, hey, if your plan is to custom build this stuff, like, are you really prepared to spend that money?
There's, if you boil it down, and it's really no different in the consumer world, right? The 3 most important calls that a website will make, and when I say that, that's going to be the inquiries that an end user will make. It'll be price, it'll be inventory position, right? Do you have it in stock, yes or no? And order status, right? So we've, like I said, we built a site that has these features all mapped out, right? Of what we need. We know exactly what data we need from the ERP in order to power that functionality. Okay. So we've taken all of that in our effort to productize this, and we've kind of boiled it down into about 10 different APIs, right? So when we engage with a customer, right, first thing that we do is we give them the list of the APIs, and in there it'll show exactly what data elements that they need to return to us. Now, when you're talking with some of the big ERP players, typically it's not a problem because most of them will have endpoints within their ERP that they can leverage to be able to start to pull that data together, right? But some of them have to really, like you said, they really have to start to open up what they've built, right, in order to be able to support the feature set that is required and the data elements that are required to power the features on the site.
Well, also a lot of people are on old versions. I think that's a major issue I see in B2B is like, they haven't upgraded in way too long. And to me, that's a bad sign, right? I mean, you built this like massive technical debt. And I think a lot of these companies, especially in B2B, are operating on some serious technical debt on the ERP side that they're gonna have to address. I just don't see how they're gonna survive long term without addressing it, right?
Well,
some of this could be millions of dollars of technical debt, right?
I mean, I'll just throw this in anecdotally, but I've seen the data on this, and it's kind of relates to this specifically. The two things I think that matter the most right now to people in B2B, like what prevents them from buying more, is its convenience and its clarity, right? And these are things that I saw coming out of really interesting, accumulations of surveys. And one of them is the convenience thing is very obvious, right? It's like, well, why is it so hard for me to do X, Y, and Z? Can't you make it easier? Can't I do it, mobile? Why can't I do it digitally? Right. So that's one answer. But the clarity thing is something I think a lot of people also don't quite think about as much. And that partly is related to like, the content enrichment that we're talking about, but also just like the clarity of the pricing, right? The clarity of exactly how things occur, right? You want to eliminate confusion. So it's make it convenient and make it less confusing and address those things. And then all of a sudden you're paying for all the money that you're spending to get this work done, right? All of it is going to be covered in the increase in revenue in usually a year, 18 months. Like it's not even a gigantically long time frame because people are waiting for this to happen. It's like, why can't you make it easier? I'll just not order this, or I'll only order 2 instead of 5. People make those reasons in B2B. It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, you mentioned something there that I'd like to address if I could. So it's easy for people to say, you know what, I'm opening up a new channel, right? Now I'm gonna launch my website. I'm gonna go e-commerce, and I expect all this incremental revenue, right? And that's great because it certainly is. There are no boundaries. There's no geographic. There's no territory, zip codes, or anything that's preventing you from selling your wares, to the world, right? Yeah, it has to be found, right? So there's components in there that help you do that, and some of them are what they call like search engine optimization or SEO. But I think what a lot of people don't realize, or they don't give it enough credit, is when you can take an existing customer and you can move the transaction, the heavy lifting of a transaction to online, self-service model, right? So how many price and availability inquiries does somebody go through before they actually buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those can be phone calls.
Yep.
Now, what's on the other end of the phone? A customer service rep or an inside salesperson, right? That guy's being paid hourly to answer those 6 or 7 inquiries you have on pricing availability. All right. So now all of a sudden you are able to service more customers with the same headcount because you've moved some of that transaction processing right squarely into the online world where your inside salesperson isn't going to be consumed with it. They can do and spend more time on either helping customers that need it, more revenue generating activity, right? Things like that. So it's easy, and CEOs get caught up in this all the time, is I want to see the incremental revenue. You got to look at it from a cost side too, all right? And that's all should be baked into your ROI. Absolutely.
Well, and I'll just address that one thing because I've seen this data also, and you hit the nail on the head, listeners. This is perfect. This is like the takeaway here too. There's the other C is like, it's the crisis, right? A lot of people in these survey data and strategies talk about crisis. It's like, well, what do you do with these people who are maybe we're helping along in these little things that really could be done like digitally, right? Things that could be done so easily. I'm looking for a price or whatever. Well, what you do is you make it 24/7 availability, so that people can get a problem solved when there's something holding them up from making that big purchase online. That's mostly self-service, right? A lot of buyers in B2B don't need their handheld to just, find a product number, or, that's not what they need. They need something that's a little more complicated, that's 2 or 3 steps further down the process. And if somebody's not available, it really hurts the customer, the relationship, right? It hurts that relationship. Oh my God, I have to wait till tomorrow. Oh my God, I have to fill out this form. Oh my God, I can't reach them on the phone. So that's the crisis piece, and that's exactly what you're addressing.
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about that phone piece, right? Because calling up is like a hassle in the sense that, right, if I have to call to get something, I'm expecting it to be something that's like a hard problem, right? Like if it's as simple as like, oh, I just want to know the price and if it's available, that shouldn't be like, if I have to call for that, that seems like a lot of time on my, as a customer, that's a lot of like mental energy going in. Maybe they don't answer right away. They move me to someone else. They have to look like, it could be a 5, 10 minute, 20-minute distraction. Whereas if I can just quickly go and log into my account, might take me a minute and a half to log in and see what I need to see, right? Save me 10 minutes. And if you're a customer, you're thinking, okay, well, every 10 minutes I save, that's, could be $5-10 and it adds up, right? It's just
Absolutely.
Yeah, not to mention the distraction piece of just whenever I think about a call or a meeting, it's like, it's not just a meeting, right? You have to kind of like prepare yourself mentally before and after. It kind of distracts you, right? From other things where you can just log in. So I think there's just a massive amount of savings to the customer if you can make more of this information just easy for them online, right?
There's I don't want to really, it's not really a trend right now, but in the procurement world, and I'll put this at an end user, not so much the distributor that's launching the site, but it's the people that actually use the site, right? So when you have a procurement organization out there, they like to, or best practices is to be able to control that procurement, that spend, right? Because you don't want people out there just going to and shopping and buying whatever, right? So they go and they invest in these e-procurement solutions, all right? And I'm going to date this.
Coupa is, I think, a pretty popular one. Coupa seems to be doing well.
Yep. Exactly. So, but those e-procurement solutions, they can have all of the controls, the workflows in place to reel in maverick spend, to make sure that, are you buying things that are in compliance with our contractual obligations and things like that. They also leverage websites, right? Like our website is and we've actually created and there's a term for it. It's either called, you'll hear it called as punch out or round trip, right? So, and what this does is it allows those that are using an e-procurement solution, from within that solution, they say, oh, you know what? I want a hammer, right? So within their e-procurement solution, they'll do a search for hammer, and that distributor that's selling that particular item will come up as a vendor for that particular item. Now, the end user, the guy that's running the e-procurement system, he can go out there and he can browse that distributor site, all right? He finds that hammer, he adds it to the cart. Now, this is where it gets interesting, is like on a typical checkout process, he adds it to the cart, he checks out, that order will go right down to the distributor, he'll fulfill it, and he'll ship it. Under a punch out or round trip, he adds that item or that hammer to the cart, and when he checks out, that hammer, that item, that sharp, anything that's in the cart contents goes back to the e-procurement solution. And then all of those rules, the workflow and everything else gets applied there. And once it clears whatever rules are in place within that e-procurement solution, then the order can be released to the distributor. And it can come in via EDI, XML, it can come back through the website if it needs to, but they're able to leverage a website as the catalog for those e-procurement solutions. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, and basically you're allowing companies to follow their processes, which could be very important, right? Spend management, all sorts of things, but essentially automating it and making it very simple for them. And a lot of times I think the value too is when you do it that way, they know they have it on stock, right? I think it can also help them with double entry, from what I understand, because
absolutely,
they don't have to go, let's say they don't do that. If they buy it, now they have to say, oh, we have this on inventory. But if they do it through this process, I believe they can say now.
Well, it goes beyond that, because once the item gets sent back, or the cart contents get sent back to that e-procurement, it ends up on a purchase order, right? So at that point, now you have in your ERP, your system of record, you have a PO in which you can receive against. Once you receive against it, you can invoice against it to the customer. So it all starts from the e-procurement being able to have the need for a particular hammer, and the data stays with that entire transaction all the way through invoicing.
Yeah.
Right. There's no manual entry. There's no nothing. It's all right there.
I mean, I definitely would love to have you back, because I think we're already kind of coming towards the end here, but I want to change gears a little bit, because I want to just hear what your thoughts are on companies that you think have done well with e-commerce, and I'll kind of give you, I feel like obviously product data is a big one, right? If your product data sucks, it's like, to me, that's like the no-brainer. That's the obvious starting point. You have to have good product data, and then the ERP integration is a key part. But I think you said something super important, which is like, I guess, what's the buzzword now? Omni-channel is maybe the best. Multi-channel. Tim, you know these kind of
harmonize.
Yeah,
people using the term harmonize.
Yeah. But I think that what I'm getting at is that I feel like
omni-channel is great.
B2B needs to be thinking about, like, okay, if I go to the website, that $300 that you quoted is the same as when I call it, like, this unified experience where I don't feel like, I mean, I can't tell you, I bet how many e-commerce sites in B2B, the pricing is not the same. And I'm like, of course no one's going to ever buy. If I can get a better price when I call in, why would I ever buy on the website? Like, it's so an absurd thing to think that you pay more to buy on the website than if you can call in, right? Unless it's like $1 more, maybe the convenience is worth it, but that's not a great way to get adoption on your website, is to charge more than the call-in price. So I feel like it's about building this kind of like unified approach. And I guess, what are the experiences you're seeing with customers that are doing a good job of that? Or is there any kind of...
So if I'll just maybe call up some best practices. So the e-commerce is a legitimate channel. It is never a build it once and then don't touch it again, right? It needs to be managed like any other effective channel, right? So, and in order to do that, you need to make sure that your house is in order, right? The pricing, all right? If the website is going to show a price, it's going to show the price because it retrieved it from the ERP. There's no inside salesperson or customer service rep that's going to look at that and say, you know what, something seems off, right? So making sure that all of those pricing records in the ERP, all those customer records, the item file has all been deduped, right? There's a cleansing effort that needs to happen, right? So getting your data straight is a big piece of it, because you're not going to have anybody running interference when it's just a customer.
Find out too late, right? It's like after they've bought it on the website, then you find out it was the wrong price.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is, you probably don't want to find out after the experience has gone wrong.
Right. and then the other thing, like I mentioned, is getting the SEO, its piece, right? So making sure you find yourself a partner that has things that the search engines look for, so it drives your ranking up, right? So it's the way that the page is structured, right? And this is all stuff that a customer, and when I say customer, I'm talking about customer of the website itself, they shouldn't have to worry about, right? The page structure should be SEO friendly. The URL structure should be SEO friendly, because when these crawlers go out there, these are the things that they're looking for, right? And they use that in their algorithm. So when I do that search for the hammer, right, I'm going to get placed as highly as I can, all right? And all of that is the way that the quality of that data and how the website is actually structured, all right, on that item. That will help you in your placement. The other part of it, right, is end user adoption, right? It needs to be, some organizations, the sales folks will almost look at a website as competition, right? Because now all of a sudden, hey, you're not calling me anymore, right? You're going to the website. So companies need to be careful that they don't impact or change the commission structure within a sales organization where the sales organization is deselling the commerce side, right? They should think of this and use it as a complement, right? So focus on end user adoption, make the customers aware of what you offer, show them all of the benefits that they can get 24/7, 365. You mentioned that,
Yep,
right?
it's
The
huge.
pricing, the availability, the order status, right? Getting copies of invoices online, right? All of these are massive time savers,
Mhm.
right? To a company. Somebody's going to appreciate that. And next thing you know, they're going to start to see volume tick up. The other thing is that the website has, most websites, I know ours does, has the ability to, if you think about a customer service rep or what we call an inside salesperson, you had some that did a really, really good job of increasing what they call average order volume, right? If I'm buying that hammer, right, I might want to try to convince him or show him a screwdriver. And if I'm selling him a screwdriver, maybe I want to sell him screws that go along with it. So you can start, and everybody's been on Amazon, all right? You see, people, you bought this, but other people have bought this. Now, all of a sudden, you're starting to influence, right? And adding either cross-sell items, complementary products, right? Or upsell, right? It's great you came in under this hammer for $6, but this one for 12 is much better. Look at the reviews, look at the stars, right? Now, all of a sudden, you got upsell opportunities, right? So these things can happen and help a lot of different ways.
And so I'll just jump on that too. I mean, we've talked about this before with other guests on the podcast, but it is catching up to an extent and using a lot of things that you can translate from B2C over to B2B, but it's even just realizing that, yes, you can really focus on social media, right? B2B traditionally didn't do very much there. Also, the inevitability and the power of mobile, it's really critical. I mean, I know for a fact, a company that I had worked with in the past, they had spent a lot of money focusing almost exactly on desktop and exclusively on desktop, and then their mobile experience was just not useful, like for a lot of people, even though every year more and more people who are their customers, want to do as many things as they possibly can through a mobile device. So it really is just, one thing after another. And I'll just throw this last thing on top. You talked about, well, there are a couple things you brought up in there, but one thing that popped out for me too is that, B2B hasn't thought even as much about cybersecurity and privacy as B2C, which is fascinating to me. So this is something also that, those consumers, when you're upgrading and updating and getting more digital, they're going to be a lot happier to buy if they really feel more secure on your site as well. So it's just a whole laundry list of things, but that also kind of popped out.
Yeah, 100% agree.
I want to ask you more about the sales rep stuff. Do you think that commission? So I'm not as deeply familiar as you are with these ERP systems, but can they just tag it all in the ERP that if they bought online, it's just kind of goes down. It's still part of that sales rep. As long as it's all the same account, it's the same. They get the order volume whether they bought online or on the phone. Is that how you kind of recommend it?
Yeah, the ERPs that I'm familiar with, and those are the big ones, all of them have a sales rep attached at the customer level, right? So whether those orders are coming in via phone, EDI, XML, website, whatever, right? That at the end of the day, that customer still bought all of these items, right? This has been his volume over the past month, quarter, year, whatever, right? That rep should get credit for all of that, right? He fostered that relationship, right? The minute it starts to be where, well, he only placed it through this particular channel here, and you're not going to get credit for it. Now that channel becomes a competitor, right? And they will desell. Oh, you don't want to use the website? Call me. I'll take much better care of you, right?
Yeah.
So it can work against you.
So if you get, let's say you fix the commission issue and they're like, great, this tool's awesome, I'm getting more commission. What do you think the sales rep should be doing now? Like, is it that they should be focused on the more complex sales, pushing the website for smaller stuff, or how do you recommend that they?
Yeah. So
like this is a whole different world now that sales reps have to rethink their role.
So what we've, and again, all of our stuff, our website has all been built around customer requests, right? End user needs. So we've actually have built what we call a salesman or a sales rep utility that allows a sales rep, all right? So we can attach all of the particular customers to a particular sales rep profile. So when that sales rep goes into, they make their weekly visit to Joe over at, that whatever plant he's going to, right? He'll log on as himself and he will scroll and he'll say, okay, this is you. Now, all of a sudden he can actually log on like he's part of that customer. So he can show the customer, this is your price. Here's your orders, right? And you just, by the way, you just placed this order 30 seconds ago. Somebody just called it in, right? And here it is. And so he can see the order status, right? They can see the invoicing. So they can use that as a means to get in front of their customer and start to show them the value and the power of that tool. Right?
And one thing I've seen also, and I think it's a great innovation. Again, that I would thank B2C partly for this too. Commissioned salespeople in B2C demanded this quite some time ago, where you could basically put together the orders, allow for one-click reorders from big customers, this kind of thing. So I'll give a shout out to Nordstrom because I'm familiar with their system, but their top salespeople, at B2C in Nordstrom, they can go back out to top customers and say, it's summer and this is the kind of things you should be buying. And do you want to do a one-click buy? That's really now all moving over to B2B. And it's fantastic for salespeople. It's brilliant for salespeople.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I love what you said there. That's awesome. And then what are you seeing in terms of customers? Are they getting usually like the ones that are doing well? I think it's important to think about. Not everyone's, but like the ones that you're like, wow, these guys are doing amazing. Like this is really working for them. Do they have a VP of e-commerce, director of e-commerce? What are kind of like the roles that you see that are influencing this the most, or how would you structure?
Yeah, that Isaiah, that is a great question, right? It starts well before the site is live, right?
The culture thing. I say the biggest problem in this space is culture. If you don't believe in it and your culture doesn't believe in it, it's never going to work, right?
It's exactly. It's top level support. It's having the dedicated, like I said, it is a channel. It needs to be managed and staffed like any other channel. You need dedicated resources, right? Or it's just going to limp along, right? So having those people dedicated to not only the project, and that's through the implementation, so the implementation doesn't get strung out for years on end, right? You want to get that up as soon as possible. You want to start to realize and start hitting and making your payback and your return on your investment, right? Is getting that team identified, empowering them, allow them to make decisions. There's still a lot of CEOs that like to really hold it tight. CEOs got a million hats that they wear, right? So empower, put the right people in place, let them make these
CEO, especially unless you're like a 10-person company, which most of these distributors are more than that, they're not going to have the time to do this.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. So it's empowering them, and then
is it a e-commerce director? What are the titles that you see seeming to work? Or I know it's not always going to be the same.
Well, it's funny because sometimes the projects will roll up to marketing, because typically, I'm going to be marketing my company online, right? So you'll see something there. Sometimes they roll up to IT, right? Sometimes they'll create a separate channel for it, and it'll roll up to like a VP of sales or something, because they look at it as a channel. So I would say it's probably more common for it to reside under the sales and marketing. However, some of it them view it as an IT play, and they will have it roll up into IT. So I've seen everything from directors, VPs. I'm trying to think if I've seen a C-suite type. I don't think I've seen a C-suite yet.
I have, but only in the very biggest, very
Yeah,
biggest.
probably.
What you're getting at is so important, right? Because ultimately, the reason I think these projects don't go as well as they should or fail completely is because it is marketing, sales, and IT.
Mhm.
You have three different departments. Like it is literally, it's ERP, it's operations, it's fulfillment, and then sales and marketing. And if you just throw, where I see things fail often is like they throw a marketing person at it, and it gets way too, they're way in over their head on the technical side, right? When it comes to integration and features and managing budget. And then, you know, if you put it on the IT side, they're just like trying to think about like, oh, how do you make this work? And like, they're almost thinking of it as like a cost center. And the IT people are just like, oh, like make it cheaper. I just want it to do this one XYZ. And they're so far removed from sales and marketing. They don't have that lens. So I see that as where things kind of break down, is when it's too IT, they're not thinking about the upside of all the growth and brand and marketing. And when it's too sales and marketing, they're neglecting the IT side. And that's why I think you need someone that either it's cross department or they have a ability to kind of like bring them two together, or the three departments together, you know?
So before I took this role on, I had responsibility for delivery, right? So all of the implementations and things like that. And I would try my best to give guidance to some of these to get the product launched, right? Get it out there. Let's get the integration. Let's get the content enriched. Let's get the site themed, right? Let's get it out there. Let's get some users on it, right? And then let them come back and tell us that it's great, but, right? And then you start dealing with enhancements. Some of these projects can get hung up because everybody thinks they know what's best for their customers, right?
Before it even exists.
Yeah, exactly. But nobody knows better than the customer themselves,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
get it out there, let them pound on it for a while. You know, they may come back and say, this is great, or it's good, but this really will be much, much more helpful. But we can always revisit that. You know, we can come back and we can do them. But to delay an implementation by, 6 months for, some enhancement. Now I get it. If there's a business model requirement in there that is absolutely needed for go live, 100%. All right. I get it.
Sure.
Right. But if there's some tweaks that, let's get it out there. Let's get it into the hands of the people that are going to use it.
Yeah.
So
I think it's especially important to what you said, whereas if they already had the feature, let's say it's a rebuild, then I can see how it's important, right? Because they don't want to lose something that they had and the customers are using it. But if it's like something that doesn't even exist yet, why are you delaying the whole project because of something that might not even work? Like you might launch it and then no one uses the feature, right?
Yeah.
You're really I saw a really great podcast where they had like one of the top Apple engineers, and his argument was that a lot of companies, the reason they struggle so much is they either get too data driven on past data. So they're like looking too much into the past, but that can be valuable, right? If customers are using XYZ, we need to make it better. When you're trying to build something new, it's really just an opinion. And he said, Steve Jobs was just very good at making those he called them opinion-based decisions, which is making basically assumptions about what the customer wants. And sometimes they were wrong, right? iPhone 1, they were wrong about things, then they fix it in iPhone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, every version gets better. But iPhone 1, it's like, so apparently like the glass decision was a very hard decision at the time in 2008. They were going to go with plastic, and Steve Jobs was like, no, we have to have glass. At the time, that was like a very like, looking back now, you're like, oh, of course it's glass, right? But
well, I mean, and I could talk about Apple for many episodes, just like talk about them. Many, many years ago, I did software training for Apple. And this was a really long time ago when I had a desktop publishing business. It's like that long ago, right? But the thing that you just said, Isaiah, about, you know, how things worked and what they were focusing on, they were really concerned. They wanted to know exactly what came out of training sessions and what the customers were saying. It's like, you know, does this package just work right? Does the laser printer really make as much sense? Should it fit on the desktop in the way that it fits? Should it turn the other orientation? They wanted all that, right? And it's never changed. And I think that that's one of the things that's a great takeaway for B2B today is that, you know, are you talking to your customers more than just like getting a random, like, you know, 5-star review here and there and reading like a line? Do you have a customer panel? Do you do customer focus groups among your, you know, clients and customers? These are things that these companies must do, right? And then it's opinions, but it's opinions of people who are actually spending the money, right? Who are keeping your business going.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, I have one question for you, just a quick one, and then I know we're going to wrap up soon. I always like asking stuff like this, but what did you think you were going to be doing with your career when you know, first got to college, like day one in college? What did you think you'd be doing at this time?
Definitely working at Unilog for sure, right?
You know, I always wonder, like people always have twists and turns, but you know, when you were that guy, like you got out of high school and you're heading to college, what did you think you'd be doing?
Well, you know, that's interesting because it's actually a pretty interesting story. So when I finished up, you know, grad school, got my MBA in finance, I started off working for that distributor in the finance group, right? But I've always had like this, I guess, IT little spin to me, right? And if you guys remember I'm going to really date myself here. If you guys remember the Pentium processors.
Yes,
oh,
I
yeah,
do.
of course.
Right? So I
feel like it was exciting.
I had a
Pentium processor.
Yes.
I had a Pentium 60, which was like a supercomputer back then, and I was the data warehouse. So I would get these on disks. I would get all of this data, and I actually helped Microsoft write certain versions and fix certain bugs in Access, Microsoft Access, because I was crunching so much data through there, right?
Yeah.
And then it just built from there, and slowly it transitioned out of finance into systems. And then I had all financial systems, which was AR, AP, GL, HR. And then from there, they decided they wanted to launch that whole e-business suite and said, hey, you've done a real good job over there. Why don't you take this on? So it just kind of, it's kind of amazing where I ended up versus where I started.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. You know, that's the way life is, right? You know, the e-commerce didn't exist when I was in college, right? So here we are, right? You know?
Yeah. So
Isaiah, let me throw it back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, any last remarks, or, you know, just want to give people some insight on how to get in touch with you, or?
Yeah, so, you know, if you have the need, right? Again, we are truly turnkey. We've built a very robust solution that's I'll call it pre-baked, right, within certain verticals that are strategic to us. So we have the content piece of it covered. We have the commerce piece. We have the integration piece. So all of the major components or major pieces that you would run into, 9 times out of 10 isn't going to be anything that we haven't seen before, right? So we're a pretty good fit. We're a little bit on the unknown side because we're a little bit smaller, but you know, we're changing that, right? We're doing things like this. We're working with some of the large ERPs out there. We're heavily involved in some of the major industry groups out there, you know, to work with them on certain industry specific functionality. So we have our customer advisory groups. We sit in on these industry meetings, right? We offer our perspective. We do things like this. Like, you know, I was at an HVAC show, and they want to know what's going on in the world of e-commerce and HVAC, right? So we're doing things like that. So, you know, the company's called Unilog. I'm Brian Lombardo. I don't know, Isaiah, if you plan on putting any contact information up or anything like that. But if you have an interest, feel free to reach out and we'll take care of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely have to have you back. And it was really, really good episode for sure.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to all our listeners again. We're coming to the close of episode 76, and as you pointed out, right before July 4th.
It was all planned. That was totally
no plans for that. But thanks so much, and we would love to have you back at some point. So
great.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.